Welcome to this ENTOTA webinar entitled Revolutionise Your SAP Data Migration. In the next 30 minutes, we will look to cover how ENTOTA's approach to data migration can make significant cost savings on that data migration, and also look to de-risk your go-live, your cutover period for that implementation of your SAP application, be that CRM, ERP, or any other SAP offerings around this space. What we will also introduce is our data migration portal, and we will look at how that can make a significant difference in the code development and also in the control and the governance of your data migration processes moving forward. If we look at the agenda, we will look to cover and discuss the common data migration problems that we see on many data migration projects. We'll look and introduce the data migration portal and give you an overview of the steps that we follow using that portal and the approach that we take to data migration as an overall methodology. Then provide a summary of that, and then we'll provide the contact information at the end if you wish to follow up at all for any detailed demonstrations or more in-depth discussion around the data migration solution offerings that ENTOTA has. So what do we find as problems that need addressing? The problems we look and we find on many occasions when we go onto customer site are that they are using numerous documents, spreadsheets flowing around to manage their data migration process. Be that data definitions, business rules, mapping specifications. And the key problem there is that because they're just maintaining them in documents, spreadsheets, Word documents, etc., then they become out of sync. There's very little governance around the process of managing those documents, and it adds little or no value to the project. Because the code becomes out of sync with the mapping specifications or the business rules, and there's no tie between the functional, the business areas and the technical team. What we also find is that as we get nearer and nearer to go live is that normally there's a lot of disconnection between the physical solution build, i.e. the coding in your extraction, transformation and loading tools or in your SQL or whatever it is, or your Excel spreadsheets you're using to manipulate the data, and the specifications that are producing that data and in theory are controlling that data specification and that data migration process. What we also find is that there's silos of knowledge. It's very difficult for you to find the right people, and when it is, they have that information, it's very hard for them to share the information in a standardized fashion amongst their team. And also in trying to do that and allowing us to adopt standards around there, what it seems to be is that standards and the adoption of standards tends to be seen as a delimiter to this. It seems to stopping things from moving forward, so it's not enabling us to move forwards with the data migration in a way that is allowing us to successfully deploy, but also in a most efficient way. So what we're looking to introduce here, we're not asking for people to collect different information, we're not asking you to collect more information. What the portal's approach is really to do is to bring all of that together into a centralized point for collaboration, and it's bringing together the data definitions, the mapping specifications, the business rules, etc. into a single portal. What it's also introducing is the concepts of business process governance. The inventories, the definitions, the business and data quality rules are all stored in a single place and they're assigned ownership. We have security models implemented in there that control who can update, who can see, etc. the data within the portal. So by doing this, we're bringing everything into a controlled fashion, and we're not just storing the information in documents. And the main point about not storing it all in documents is that we then have the ability to generate the code required for the data migration directly from the portal. So we will auto-generate code for data services, that's SAP Data Services, and SAP's Information Steward application for post-go-live data governance. And we can generate the template jobs, the full jobs that check the technical validity, the enrichment processes and the rule violation handling of the data as it moves through the data migration process, no matter which object is you're defining or which business process it is that you're working through. So let's take a look at an overview of the data migration project process. So what we have here is a slide that we're going to go through our step-by-step process as we detail the steps that we would go through in a classic data migration project. On the left-hand side, we have our SAP and non-SAP source data, our legacy environment, if you will. And on the target side, we have an SAP application landscape. This solution could be used for non-SAP, but we're focusing here on the SAP data migration process. The first step of the process that we go through is to extract, stage, and profile that data. So we're using this as a legacy data collection mechanism, and we're using the SAP Data Services application to extract the data from the source legacy systems, maintaining its data format in that source system, and then using the profiling capabilities of both data services and information steward to give us visibility of the data from a quality perspective, to allow us to make a decision about how we approach the harmonized phase, which we'll cover later, but also how far we need to go with regard to things like active record determination, the archival of data, etc. as part of the data migration process, which are all things we need to consider. So the profiling, and here is just a screenshot of Information Steward showing some address profiling that's going on. So this is giving me a lot of information about how good the quality of the address data is that I'm dealing with, in this case around a vendor record that we're pulling the data out for. And we can see validity, the amount of data that's correctable and how much is invalid because maybe we haven't selected all the fields, or there's some data issues with the source system that have been entered that need to be resolved at source. And we can follow up with that with the knowledge that we have the business information available to us to go and ask those relevant questions back to the business. Once we've defined and we've gone through that extraction phase and we've done the active record determination, what we also need to approach is looking at the target data design and the business rules. And these are target business rules. So we make a distinction between source mappings and the pieces that aren't going to be repeatable, or maybe, but in a lesser extent, on your data migrations, and the target definitions, which absolutely are. So here we're defining the target data definitions for the target SAP application. And that will be a process of defining data object inventories, the data object models, and then the definitions below that. And it's absolutely paramount that we get these right, and we work through the process of getting these right, because we're going to store this information not in documents but in a database, in a staging area underneath our portal that allows us then to use the auto-generating capabilities of our engine that we use to generate the data services data migration content code for the data migration processes itself. We also have the portal and the capabilities for then selecting and capturing business rules, be those default value rules, be those simple rules that are parameter driven, i.e. if this input value equals X, then set this output field to Y, or multiple input parameters and output parameters. We can also go much further with complex rules, and again we would generate those into the code to indicate to the developer that there are complex rules that need to be applied as part of the data migration process. Throughout this whole process and through all the different steps that we're talking about here, we are capturing metrics around this. So I can see how complete my data definition metrics are, how complete and valid my data definitions are, my mapping metrics likewise as we move into the project by project actual implementation steps, and also the error handling. How many errors have I got in this object at this point of execution? What about the next run? Am I improving or am I getting worse? And we store all of these metrics away that can be visualized with either the Business Objects reporting suite of tools, your own reporting suite of tools if you have something different, or directly within our portal application where we have a metrics site that allows you to get to all this information likewise. If we look here on this screenshot here, this is just a screen grab of our data migration portal looking at the data definition, and here we can see a cost center data definition broken down with its fields, the check tables, the data types, etc., that are there, and we validate this for every definition that's created against the target SAP data dictionary to ensure you're correctly defining your data definitions. As we move forward, and once we've gone through the profiling stage, we're going to have a much better idea of understanding whether there is a requirement to harmonize the data. This could be standardized cleansing, just getting and ensuring that the data has been manipulated from its legacy values through to its target SAP values. Or it could go much further, and it could introduce the concept of having to standardize addresses or firm information or individuals, depending on how your customers or vendor databases are defined. And also look at then the possibility of requiring to deduplicate that data, i.e. to remove duplicates within the landscape so that you're not migrating data that is just clearly incorrect and is duplicated in your source applications. That could be because it's coming from a single application where there are duplicates, or because you're harmonizing across multiple source applications into a single target environment. So we have solutions for that, data quality accelerator solutions and accelerators that sit on top of the data migration solution, and if required can be plugged in, much akin to a jigsaw, to allow you to then to harmonize that data and to bring that data and bring those data attributes forward, and also bring them to the attention of the relevant business owners to approve which record moves forward, and creating that sort of best record or golden record moving forwards. Moving into step 4, we're now getting into the process. We've defined our data object inventory and our definitions. We've got our business rules from a target perspective. Now we're going to enter a project. And at this point, we're then going to start saying, okay, what is my source application landscape? And how am I going to create my mapping specifications for that? And again, the portal allows us to record those mapping rules, create those conversion inventories, and then to define that mapping specification that is directly driven from the data object definition. And that's the key point. Again, we're not creating a document here. We're not creating an Excel spreadsheet for somebody to fill in. Yes, you can export from the portal and work in Excel and then re-import it and then validate that is the correct definitions that have been allocated in there and that the full data definition has been populated with the relevant fields and the relevant information. So this concept of bringing that out of documents and bringing that into a stage database and into a portal allows us much more control over those mapping definitions, over those data object definitions, and keeping the two aligned and in sync. The next step, and I guess the cleverest part of the solution, or the bit that really allows us to differentiate ourselves as a solution and where we believe the biggest savings are going to be made, as well as through the overall governance and the management of your data migration projects, are going to be in our auto generation and code generation capabilities. What we have here is the capability to drive the data services content required for your data migration from the data definitions and from the mapping rules that you define within your portal. And what we generate is a dynamic code line that looks at the portal for those definitions. So if I go in and identify that a record in this sense and this field is business required, then the autocode and the code that is generated will go and check the portal and say, this field is a business required field. I need to apply a rule that makes sure that there is a value populated into that. Likewise, if there is a value mapping piece that needs to be applied to a column to convert, let's say, a country value of Great Britain across to a value of GB so that SAP can load it, that will be auto-generated into it. And if a change occurs in the portal, so somebody changes the mapping so that it's now applying a different rule, so maybe United Kingdom has been found and we need to map that to GB, then so be it. Automatically that gets generated. The next execution of the job, that will be applied with no code changes to the underlying data migration solution in the data services, in the ETL layer, the extract, transformation and loading tool. So we're creating this dynamic approach to allow us to facilitate the business work and the business facilitation of answers and questions and resolution of errors within the portal without needing to change the code and hide the complexity of the code generation process within the actual underlying ETL tool. If we look here, it's just a screen grab of the jobs. This was all automated. This is just looking at specifically the enrichment step, and we have this concept of passing in different rules at different enrichment steps. So we'd apply the default value rules and the value lookups, the configuration data changes in enrichment 1. We then apply business rules in either step 2 or 3, depending on whether they relied on other business rules or whether they were just a single rule that was being applied for the sake of that column. So we have the idea of nesting as well rules if you need to apply multiple rules to the same column. Then we're formatting the data. And of course, we're recording the rule violations at all points. So at any point in this process, whether it's in the validation from a technical validation, i.e. the mandatory columns or the format of the fields is correct, or whether it's a check to ensure that the data is now populated after applying an enrichment rule, we store all of that information, we keep all that in rule violation tables to allow the business to sign off those changes and to approve those into audit trail. And I'll come on to a bit more of that as we move on with the presentation later. So to step 6, as we're moving into now, we've gone through this process, we're running our data migration project for our relevant objects, we're then in the process of loading that data. And in this step, we have the ability, because of data services capabilities and integration capabilities with SAP as a target landscape, or as a source landscape for that matter, we allow us to pull data out from the SAP system to support our configuration data conversions that we're doing, but also to use standard mechanisms for loading the data into the SAP landscape, be that IDOC, be that into an existing LSMW or newly created LSMW project, using ISMW if you're in a utilities or banking sector, or even SLT with the new SAP landscape transformation technology for loading the data. So data services can prepare data for any of those application integration points. It also does BAPI and RFC enabled function calls, etc., as you would expect with an SAP toolset. So we have many concepts available to us, and we will be pragmatic around this approach as to which one fits and makes sense for the relevant data volumes, complexity, and also what's available within your existing landscape, so that we're making the most cost-effective mechanism for loading the data into the target landscape. The last point I really want to cover, I guess, from this concept is really to look at it from a reconciliation perspective. What is it that we need to do at this point? We need to look at this and ensure that the data coming in from the source legacy application and the business that owns that data as it transforms through the process of the data migration into the target SAP landscape has full visibility of that data as it moves through. and where possible, we automate the reconciliation of that data. So as I pointed out earlier, what we do is we stage the data as we first extract the data from the legacy landscape. We then use and store the data in active record determination sets to allow us to identify what data is moving forward and what data may move into an archival process. And then we also look, as it moves through the mapping, through the validation and through the enrichment steps, to allow us to store the data at each of those steps. And the reason we do this is that we can then build reports that show the legacy data coming through and being enriched and converted when it is proven to be valid, technically. And it will then have the default values assigned to it. It will then have the enrichment rules allocated to it. And as such, we will then get a data set that allows us to compare the source data to that target enriched set before we then try and load that to the target SAP application. So it allows for a sign-off of that data and approval by the business as an automated approach. Once we then have that sign-off, the automated reconciliation can then take place between the enriched tables, the final step of our migration before loading, and the target SAP application layer where it's loaded to. And we have automated processes to pull the data back from the SAP landscape and to reconcile it against the enriched tables, so that once you've got sign-off from your legacy application through to enrichment, and you've then got a proof that the enriched table matches the target SAP environment, you've got an end-to-end process that can be audit trailed, signed off as a point in time of that data being correct at point of migration as it moves forward. So it's very much about having the auditability and the traceability of a standardized approach to data migration, and that approach would work whether you're working on a customer object, material, vendor, cost center. It doesn't matter, it's the same process every single time. And if we look here, this is just an example of one of the reports. This is using web intelligence. This is using the business objects reporting and analysis tools, but it could just as easily be displayed in SQL tables, within the portal itself, within our metrics web portal, or it could be within your own reporting tool set, be that one of the competitive products, be it Microsoft, Cognos, etc., etc. It doesn't matter. We're not going to ensure that you have to use those tools, but what we will say is that we come with pre-built reporting around this and pre-built concepts in there that will obviously make best use of that business objects reporting landscape if and when you have it. Just to kind of, I think, summarise, or just to give you some feedback of what we've found on projects we've executed, and these numbers have been validated on a number of clients that we've worked through, and sort of going through those steps that we've just talked about. We've looked at this from a three-step approach, and we've looked at this as really three approaches to data migration that we've seen. The sort of the kind of old school, the original approach to using sort of Excel, SQL, Access databases, etc., that we see people still using to this day. And that sort of sits there on the sort of left-hand side of the chart as you're looking at it. Then we're looking at sort of the savings that can be made with utilising a generic ETL tool, be that data services, be that a competitive product. ETL being extract, transformation and loading tool. So using a tool set to support your data migration process can clearly have some significant savings. What we believe in our solution is that we can further cut down on those savings, and there's two major areas that we will see that we will make some major savings on. We're going to see major savings around the build of the technical data migration solution because we auto-generate the code. So we're not just asking you to use a tool and then to create objects and create those jobs and start from scratch. Or we're not even asking you to take some of the other solutions that are out there that already contain some of those objects but need the manual modification of those jobs to make them execute correctly for your environment. What we're having is a dynamic code generation that allows us to very much facilitate that and to cut down that technical build time dramatically, but also feedback and allow for that dynamic capability of the portal changes to be reflected down in the code without requiring further code changes to be made, i.e. value changes or rule changes that are applied to certain columns can automatically be applied. The other area that we see general or major savings around will be in the post-go live data remediation. We've certainly seen with clients that previously where we've been involved where they've had real struggles with having to remediate data post-go live because they didn't spend enough time on the business rules, the business process readiness of the data rather than just the technical validity of the data. And it's very easy when you're just using tools like LSMW on its own and these load tools to negate the fact you don't find out where there's data is until you're actually attempting the load processes. What we're trying to do is bring a lot of that very much earlier on in the data migration and to automate that so there is no need for you to have to build in technical validation checks for format, for mandatory fields, for the lookup values, etc. That's all handled automatically. And it allows you to focus on the business rules and the data design that is relevant to the business to support that rather than the technical validations. And by getting that right, what we find is that the remediation processes are much smaller because the time has been spent with the business to identify those complex rules that are required to support the business for these specific business processes that we're migrating around these objects, be that order to cash, be that procure to pay, etc. around there. So in summary, I just want to wrap up sort of the key points that we've seen within this data migration webinar and the things we've introduced with regard to the data migration portal and the capabilities that we bring as ENTOTA around that portal. So what we're providing is really improved collaboration between the data migration team. We're not asking for you to collate any more information or anything more than you're already collecting. What we're saying is to bring that into a standardized approach and a standardized methodology and a standardized area that allows control, process control over that governance of your data migration project, from a data definitions, the inventories, the mapping specifications, sample identification so you can test run jobs without again making any changes to your code, or in things like the value mapping as well. All of that is handled centrally on a single instance and is handled there and can then be replicated out for regional implementations compared to global implementations. It improves the adoption of standardized methodology across projects because it's forcing you into that route of having to capture everything in the same fashion and allowing control over that and also validation of that to enforce that what we train and what we explain is how it's approached, is maintained and is approached that way, because we can control and check that at a project management level very easily and very visibly and make that visible to project management, the business and also the technical teams. It's all about enabling repeatability. If you're going through a data migration project and you know there are going to be other acquisitions that require it or further system landscape changes which are going to be required, then repeatability is going to be key. And having that set up, rather than just having a throwaway solution each time, even using ETL tools, then it's going to make a lot more sense to have this repeatable process that's going to save more and more each time you repeat and you rotate that process through, be that, as I say, that regional implementations or be that on different systems you're migrating as you do a step-by-step approach to a single landscape or maybe even a more complex landscape. Increased visibility is key. Improving the program and the project metrics is what we're all about. It's about storing the metadata behind the metrics, about the validity, the completeness, and where we are in the process of getting the data quality to a level that supports the business process and is ready for the data migration to be approached as we move forward. All of those metrics can be made visible in the portal or in other reporting tools. We don't have to use the portal for that. The data is stored in the underlying staging area for that, and those can be exported out or could be queried, analysed as you will with any of those tools, including obviously the business objects reporting set, which we'd recommend obviously for further savings. We can reduce that technical dependency on technical experts because we're defining those data definitions once and we're going to reuse them over and over again. So yes, there is a focus requirement to get those definitions right, and we bring a lot of those with us, vanilla data definitions with us, and they will be tailored to your environment. So again, savings can be made there rather than starting from fresh each time. But there will be a reduction there in the requirement of the technical expert time. We can focus very much on what it is we need from those subject matter experts, from those business people that are going to provide the detail we need. Dramatically reducing costs about the technical build and on the post-go live data remediation. And those are the key points we've talked about. And also, I think the point there as well is just to talk about this is that we also generate from the rules that are captured for the migration. We can also auto-generate information steward content for a post-go live data governance perspective for data quality checking. So the rules you've applied for your migration, we can apply those same rules in information steward and check that your data isn't now breaking those rules once people start entering data in real time, in their day-to-day business. So it's very easy to apply rules in a data migration to enforce that this value X can only be this value if this other value for a different column is set to Y. But post-go live, you may not have built all of those validations purely from a cost perspective into your SAP application. But what you can do is monitor this and monitor against your live data set to ensure that the data you've got in your system isn't breaking those rules and is maintaining a quality of data that you had at the point of data migration cutover. And it's very key to do that, and I think that's what's the last step point on this slide is talking about. The supporting the foundation for data governance, we're introducing the concept of data governance. I've heard it mentioned it's kind of a backdoor entrance to bringing this data governance in, but what we are introducing is the concept of sign-off of data definitions. Because the data definitions and the mapping specifications are going to drive the code generation, there is no 80% complete. There is no I think I'm nearly there. We drive that process of someone signing that off because that is what the code is going to generate. That is what is going to be produced in the data services layer. So when that job runs, it ties specifically to that data definition, that mapping specification. So if there's anything wrong, it's down to those definitions that were signed off. There is no competition between the IT and the business arguing who made changes, who didn't follow the specification. It's driven from one place. So this introduction of data governance allows for the concept of this to be introduced as part of the data migration and then to live on post data migration as you start to consider how those rules move into a monitoring phase and how those should be assigned and who signs those off and who should be made aware of those data quality issues and the impact they have on the business post go live. So I think I'd like to end there. Thank you for your time. If you have any further questions or require any further information, please take a look at the ENTOTA.com website. We have the three approaches and the comparison that we had on that slide with the graph showing the different savings. We have that as available as a white paper discussing in more detail the background to those figures and those numbers and where we've got that statistical information from. If you require an in-depth demonstration of this solution or any of our other accelerators, and please take a look at the website. Again, there are a number of other solution offerings that we have in this enterprise information management space. Then please contact info@entota.com and that email will then go through to our business development teams and can be aligned to the correct resource to come back to you with answers, be it of a technical nature or be it of a business development or sales nature as well.